After talking about the production function, we want to know how businesses would respond to changes in cost of different inputs. Specifically, of course, for businesses, we're talking about coffee, wine, and olives. Farmers face cost increases from climate change. Some of that's from greater uncertainty of weather. The date of last frost in the spring is important. The amount of rainfall, how many sunny days. There are various ways that farmers can ameliorate some of those, which we'll talk about later in more detail, but they're costly in different ways. If there's less rain, farmers can irrigate. That costs money. If there's too much sun, they could plant shade trees or put up cover. Farmers could use more fertilizer to boost yields. Then there are choices of the businesses farther up in the supply chain from the farm. Coffee roasters can choose to source beans from different areas. Wine vintners can make substitutions about where they get their grapes. Olive oil presses can get olives from other farms. We can divide costs into three broad categories: cost of materials, cost of labor, and cost of rent. For a coffee shop, cost of materials would include the coffee beans, milks, sugar, cups, machines for roasting, pouring, etc. The labor costs are the baristas, the roasters, the dishwashers, the managers. Rent is going to be one of their largest costs and the most variable. A coffee shop in or near, say, Grand Central Terminal has an enormous volume of customers each day, but the landlord is the one who gets benefit of that, not the particular business. Economic rents are the value of a monopoly, and a location along a well-traveled area is a monopoly, enforced by legal means. Other private property, such as a patent, could give other monopoly rents. As we go back from the consumer, other businesses also pay rent costs back to the farmer who grew the beans on a particular piece of land that was suitable for coffee. Now, the basic economic theory about how businesses react to cost change is summarized by the Hicks-Marshall rules of derived demand. The basic question is, when an input price changes, how elastic is the quantity of that input in firms' demand for that input? With us thinking about coffee, olives, grapes, but these principles would apply to other inputs such as labor just as well. If there's a poor harvest and the price rises, then some coffee shop, perhaps a big chain, has to make changes. One extreme case could be there's zero elasticity. The bean is so valuable that businesses will just pay the increased cost. The opposite extreme could be that there's infinite elasticity. The business sees the increased cost and zeroes out that use of that particular input. Most cases will be towards the middle, where the business makes some reduction in use. But we'd like to assess where exactly in the middle. The business use of the input will be more sensitive to price, which is to say more elastic, in cases where these conditions are met. First is if the price elasticity of the final product is higher. Some final products are very sensitive to price changes. Others not so much. If a hospital has to pay more for a particular drug, they can raise their prices. People in the ER are not very sensitive to cost. On the other hand, splurge items can be very sensitive to price. Next question, to what degree is it technologically feasible to substitute other factors? If coffee beans from a wide swath of South and Central America, say, become more expensive, then beans from other countries could be substituted, although that might influence the taste. Or maybe Robusta beans could be substituted for Arabica, although they are lower quality. For some cases, some amount of substitution could be nearly imperceptible. The related question is how elastic those replacement inputs are. If a business wants to, say, double the amount of beans they buy from some island in Indonesia, how much would that price move? The final consideration is the cost share of the input. If the input makes up a rather small fraction of the price that consumers pay, then even substantial price changes might have very small impact. But things are never quite that simple. The supply chain can be very long, and that creates its own sources of instability, the so-called bullwhip effect, identified decades ago. That's the observation that as you get farther away from the final consumer, there are larger and larger variations in orders. Typical supply chain might go from the initial producer to distributor to wholesaler to retailer to consumer. At each step, there are people who are managing inventory. They don't want too much inventory since they have to store it, and some products will go bad, but they also don't want to fall short. So they try to look into the near future and figure out how much to order. Some of the bullwhip effect comes from psychological factors. People might become over-optimistic. But a lot of it's simple inventory behavior. For example, suppose a wine shop sells 1,000 bottles a month and has 4,000 bottles in inventory. So each month they buy 1,000 from their wholesaler. Suddenly, they see an increase in sales to 2,000, which means their inventory drops down to just 3,000. How much do they order next month? Well, at least they want their usual 1,000 plus another 1,000 to make up for the diminished inventory. So that's 2,000 right there. But if they think that any of that increase will continue, then they want to order even more. If they think they're going to be selling 2,000 a month, then they might want to double their inventory. So they might order 3,000 or 4,000 bottles. An increase in demand of 1,000 leads to a 2,000 or 3,000 increase in orders. So their wholesaler might see not a doubling, but a tripling of their usual sales. And then that goes to the next step in the chain with an even larger order. And that goes in the opposite direction hard as well. If the wine shop sells only 500, then that means they have an extra 500 bottles unsold in inventory. They might skip deliveries next month. So again, a change in final demand of 500 could mean a change of 1,000 in orders from wholesalers. The bottom line is that farmers, who are the farthest away from the consumers, can see huge swings in orders from even relatively small changes in final demand. It's tough to be a farmer.